Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a series of our conservatory bands panel discussions during COVID-19. We have been delighted to present several wonderful panels, and this evening, morning, whenever you're watching it, we are absolutely thrilled to have this committee with us. I will turn it over to my colleague Steve Davis in a minute, but before I do, I'll preface this that all the questions that are about to be asked of this panel were generated by over 120 students of ours that are enrolled in conservatory ensembles during this interesting time in our time. So we have collated all the questions into the most poignant themes, and we'll share those questions with our guests this evening. So, Steve, would you mind welcoming our panel?
It would be my great pleasure. Thank you, Joe. I'm so excited about the next hour and some minutes. We have three very, very fine composers that are joining us for this discussion about all things composition and composition process. I have performed each one of these people's music, and that's the reason they were invited, to be frank. Each journey of these pieces have been meaningful to me and inspirational to me and life enhancing and life changing to me. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Roshan Eddie, who's on the faculty at the University of Michigan. And I've performed Roshan's pieces here at the conservatory. We've recorded one of her pieces, and we've worked together at the Interlochen Arts Camp in the summer. And I've gotten to know her there and her beautiful family. We've had many nice moments together, and I've been really blessed for that. Ricardo Lorenz joins us from Michigan State University. And last year, if you're here with us as a current student, we performed his El Muro, and it was a really beautiful journey on our behalf, and it was something that we all tremendously enjoyed. So it's a pleasure to invite Ricardo Lorenz to share with us as well. And then, of course, my great colleague for the last 15 years, Dr. Chen Yi, as we know her. I've never met anyone in my life with more personality and more optimism and more buoyancy and more inspiration than Dr. Chen. And I can't even recall how many of her pieces I've performed, but we've performed in China together, and we've recorded pieces with the Prism Saxophone Quartet and Dragon Rhyme and Spring Festival, and I can go on and on and on about all of that. So everybody wave and say hi, and then we'll get going here. It's a pleasure to have you all. Joe, I'm going to turn it back over to you and let you ask the first question.
Thank you, Steve. And the title of the panel is Composition, Process, and Collaboration. So this question came to the top of the pile many times. Roshan, we'll start with you, and it's about we can kind of hit a couple of them: commissioning works, and then what, as a musician, should you have in mind when you approach a composer to commission? And I mean, that it's a two-part question, but how do you go about commissioning, and what should you have in mind when you're approaching that?
hmm I want to start by saying that I am very much in favor of commissioning pieces. I want to come out in favor of that. I know that's a controversial topic. um, in all seriousness, I think commissioning new works it can mean a lot of things, and I think depending on I think a lot of it depends on the person who is doing the commissioning as well as the composer that they're approaching. I mean, I think what you bring to the table depends on the composer you're approaching. I mean, I think about some of the students that might be watching this video, and I think about how many wonderful composers they have in their own peer groups or in the periphery of their own peer groups, and what they might bring to that conversation might just be like, wouldn't it be fun if? Actually, I find so many of these conversations at so many levels, now that I say it out loud, so many of them start with, wouldn't it be fun if? And so maybe that's, maybe that thing that I just pulled out of the air, maybe that's an important thing to start with. In addition to, like, there's logistics stuff, but I think when there's like a synergy between composer and performer where like you start to have either like a conversational dialogue or a musical dialogue and the sparks start to fly and everybody starts getting ramped up, and then you start to think this this really could be something, and then I think you can open the discussion, and then um it doesn't there doesn't have to be money. I think in early stages of discussion, I think there are a lot of ways for a collaborative commissioning arrangement that could to be beneficial for everybody, um, particularly at an early level, particularly for student composers and student performers. Um, so I think my answer is kind of vague. And we can certainly talk specifics about it. And I'm certainly
Yeah.
happy to kind of throw the
We'll hit some of
discussion
the
out there.
we'll hit some of the further topics and some of the other questions, but I mean generally they just want to know that some people have not done this process before. So,
Yeah.
Chinyi, do you have anything you want to offer on that side?
And if you ask me for personal experience, usually I would receive those commissions from people who have known my music. Maybe they would think of my style or or the cultural background. So that's why they came to me and asked for this kind of cultural styles, that kind of works. And also they may have heard my works written for a fixed instrumentation, which would fit in their needs. So that is what I have done in the past. Although some musicians or groups who came to me have asked me to write something that I had never tried. That's possible, but I would love to try. But if for my students, I encourage them a lot to take up commissions. I also work as a matchmaker to pair
That's a
them
good
up.
way to put it. I love that. Yeah.
Because if I am one of the committee members for the academic studies for the performing students, I would ask them and guide them to have a multicultural kinds of backgrounds and reach out. If they have some similar styles or cultures or traditions where they came from, I would match them with our students. And then they would came up with great pieces for them to even perform in not only the graduate recitals, but also conferences nationally, internationally. So it came up with a very good result. And also we have a COM collaborations program. And that's why our composers would work with other departments really well, very closely, particularly for some very popular studios. They would come up to us to ask for as many students as possible. So we would sign up with them to pair them up for one semester work. And particularly recently is the piano department. They had the Debussy reimagined, and now they have a Ravel reimagined. So
Wow.
it's more than a dozen of works coming out every semester. And those would also extend to dance department. So every year there is a dance project. So the end of the semester, they would go together to perform our work along with the premiere of their choreography class.
You know,
Yeah.
how many of us are going to use the term now? You know, matchmaker. I
I
love
love it. I
good
love it.
analogy, and it's not even just from Fiddler on the Roof. I love it. Very well done.
Yeah. I have learned this from Kronos Quartet a long time ago.
That's great. That's great. Ricardo, you want to offer anything?
Well, yes, what Chenji just said, I think goes to the core of what I think a commission is. First and foremost is a human relationship. It's a partnership. It's basically a relationship. Now it's a very unique relationship, I think, because if you are calling it commission, well, you have to accept that in ideal situations there has to be money. There has to be money exchange in ideal situations. But of course we know that young students, they don't have the money, and it's great to have a trade-off. You play my music and I compose for you. But I always like to instill in my students the fact that you need to aim at eventually being paid for what you do. That's otherwise, what's the point? And there's ways of doing it. So I think so. The first thing is, you go into these things not for the money, but you go because of the relationships you're going to make. But you have to think, yes, eventually this is a profession, and you're going to have to learn how to eventually come out with a monetary value for what you do. And there's nothing wrong with that. It could be, my very first commission, somebody paid me $250. $250 was great. So I say it's important to think about that and at least explore. Is it possible that maybe even if it's a colleague of mine, can he help me or her? Can she or he help me copy the material, copy the parts, for example? Can we both invest in copying of the music? But I think it is important for them to see that there is an exchange, a monetary exchange. At least that's what it is, because that's going to serve them very well later on when they actually get the commission from the Chicago Symphony, for example. And the sooner they get to know how to do the business part of it without forgetting the human relationship part of it, then the better they will be.
That's great. That's great.
Chen Yi, when you, this is for everybody, and I know, Dr. Chen, you've written for professional level ensembles, you've written for collegiate ensembles, you've written for middle school or high school ensembles as well as part of projects. Talk to me about that. What's the differences? What do you think about when you're in the 3 different paradigms that I just mentioned?
Most of my repertoire was written for normal orchestras, like orchestras throughout the world that could play not too hard and not too easy. But that is in the middle of the pile. Once I got this commission from Roche with Carnegie Hall and Cleveland Orchestra, what they told me is that, hey, we have a portable size and even bigger you could write for. And also, they brought me to Carnegie Hall to listen to their performance first. And then I found out that, they could play pianissimo, completely different from mezzo piano, right? And they had a wide range of repertoire as well, although I knew them before, and that is the first time I heard them in live, right? Live performance. So that's the difference, because then I wrote pianissimo for them. I don't think that would work for everything, for every orchestra and every band easily. Although I have heard some excellent band CDs which would touch that kind of dynamics as a group, and still is not normally used in the nature of the instrumentation, right? And so that is something you keep in mind. Also, no matter how hard Petri also types for each person in the orchestra, they would deal with that. Because before we went up to the stage for the final dress rehearsal, well submersed, he told me, murmuring, oh, maybe the piccolo is too high. I said, no, although it's really high, still it's possible. And then he said, let's see. And then walk onto stage. And after the rehearsal, he said, no problem. and she could do it very well without any question. And so we just keep quiet and didn't say anything. So that's possible, because the way you wrote for a chamber ensemble, like some of the top chamber ensembles, which you could do, you could also do for those orchestras. Yes. But for many other orchestras, I would also consider if the piece would be played not only by regional orchestras, but county, like smaller orchestras or many chamber orchestras in Europe, and which may not have a larger force. even some of them don't have two pairs of French horns, for example. And then you have to think, if one pair of French horns, can you put them together always to even to play unison? No, it would be really hard. And to play some virtuoso things or high pitches. So that is something kept in mind. And also, I really pay attention to the number of percussion players use, because middle school bands could have 10 or 8 of them. You don't need to play many of them. Each person could play something. They may hold one thing or two things for the whole piece, but you could use many of them, and they do a great job. But for some chamber orchestras, one percussionist would deal with many of them because they are virtuoso players. They don't use many. So that is something I consider. If I had to use a lot of keyboard instruments, that may be a problem, I think, because considering the size of the stage, you usually don't have a larger stage for every city. Sometimes many keyboards would make the scope really huge. And so those are the things I would consider. For example, I wrote for Peabody Conservatory, although they told me that they have many, whatever you want to. And still, it was the first time they brought the orchestra to New York to perform. So I thought that, maybe not so many keyboard. So I have a pure non-pitch percussion instruments in my momentum. So that is a piece being played by many other orchestras.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Ricardo?
I mean, look, isn't there a saying that if they give you lemons, make lemonade? So in other words, you work with what you have, and you need to do your homework. If it's professional orchestra, well, find out who are the star players, and maybe write a solo or two for them. If it's a college orchestra, or if it's even a high school orchestra, well, then talk to the conductor and see how the environment is, and how they do things, how the rehearsals work, because that's going to tell you what type of repertoire they do and what you can write. But I always think that we have to be, as composers, true to what we want to do as a statement. So it's not like we're going to just bow ourselves for whatever strengths or limitations of this ensemble. We have to be ourselves. So the balance is what I'm really interested. How do we eventually express what we want to express, a uniqueness, while still considering what you can do and what you cannot do with whoever you're writing for?
Dr. Roshan?
So I have been thinking about this question, and I think that the approach depends. I think different types of ensemble have different types of what I would maybe consider like a cultural history, or like a performance culture, specifically with how composers relate to ensembles. And in some ensembles, there are certain circumstances when composers are not super welcome. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just not super welcome. But like where it's unusual for a composer to be there, where there are very strict and unspoken rules about how the composer should behave. The composer should only speak to the conductor and not to the ensemble. The composer should say as little as possible, because there's going to be this much rehearsal time, and the composer should be grateful that there is any rehearsal time. The composer should be grateful that they've been invited to be on that stage at all. And so in that type of culture, when approached with that type of commission, when that type of ensemble approaches a composer, saying, we'd like to pay you X amount of money for this amount of time, the only answer, if you ever want to be asked back, is okie doke. And if they ask you for a 6-minute piece and you give them a 9-minute piece, they will probably play it, unless there are actual, like, I don't mean to belittle that, like, there are union issues, there are business, there are important and significant issues. I don't mean to belittle these issues, but regardless of the reasons and regardless of the history and regardless of the background, there are certain ensembles in which the performance culture is like the composer does what she's told, or we don't ask that composer back. There are other performance cultures in which, and I want to say, if maybe this is more in an educational format, maybe this is like more in a not just universities, but high schools as well, where the ensemble, it's kind of like a culture of yes, like, I want to write this piece. Like, what do you want? We want a piece from you. What is it that you want? And then we will find a way to pay you for that within reason. Do you want a band piece with a string quartet, concerto grosso? Dynamite. Do you want electric guitars? We can make that happen. You want a percussion ensemble piece with 40 singers? We can make that. So there's a certain type of performance culture that is a culture of yes, where the focus is kind of on what does the composer want, and that's certainly gratifying for a lot of reasons. And then I think with younger educational groups, the focus is on the performers, and rightfully so. I think, like, we're there to kind of to like we're like their gateway, right? Like, isn't this fun? Don't you? I have candy in my van, and I call it contemporary art music.
Yeah.
So I think our focus and our role as composers is different depending on the performance culture of each ensemble and depending on the role that each ensemble considers itself fulfilling in society.
Yeah, I got a call yesterday. I'll leave the composer out, and he said, "Steve, I'm writing a piece for middle school band, like a grade 2, and I don't know what in the world to do." And I said, to me, it's like art, visual art. There's a frame, there's a size of the canvas, and you have to create within the parameters that are the frame, right? And so middle school kids, I said, you can't. Back to Chinyi's point, I said, don't expect the 7th grade band to be able to play the most intimate pianissimo. It's not going to happen. So in your brain, you're going to have to think about how you orchestrate. And by the way, when you orchestrate, if you go into a chamber music modality, there's a very large chance that that's not going to sound the way you imagine it with younger players playing. And by the way, flutes, trumpets, and saxophones are prevalent in middle school bands successfully. And sometimes it's harder to, and I went through all these things, but it doesn't mean, but then he said, do I need to be tonal? Do I need to be major? And I said, no, I think their ears are open to whatever the passion is that the conductor and that the composer is going to try to say. I said, that's not a limit. It's an unknown. They haven't experienced maybe before, but I think they'll be exceptionally open to it, which is wonderful. So to me, it's the frame gets bigger as you go up the level. And I know, I just want to say this for sure. Roshan is talking in our environment. I hope that, for goodness, she's talking about the culture of yes when she works with the wind ensembles that we've been involved with.
Well, absolutely.
I was about to say,
much as I would.
I was about to say, we have a great job here, because that's how I feel. Like, we just,
to be honest, and I'll just do a quick aside. When I collaborate with composers and they're in the room, to be to 100% honest, that's the least stressful environment of my life, because I run a section and I turn and I say, Roshan, what do you think? And whatever you say, and then we look at the group and then we're like, let's change it. And the same with Dr.
Right.
It's the least responsibility I have. I put a lot of onus on myself prior to that. So we try to get it in a way that you can come in and enhance and change and dream and get it exactly the way you want. But I love that culture of yes. And that's one of the things that university settings have the great advantage and fortune of, is we're not beholden to profit. We're not beholden to time. We can extend times. We can work and spend whatever. And specifically wind ensembles, we don't have a body of work that's 4,000 million years. We are creating our body of work as we go. So if we don't value that and spend great joy and care with that, then we're not going to be any better tomorrow than we are today. And that would be a shame. Joe?
Can I say something, follow up to Roshan for a second? Because I like what you said about us being a gateway of when it comes to working in less experienced ensembles, like in high school and college. I have to be honest, I've learned the most in those experiences than when my music has been commissioned and performed by these professional orchestras. I mean, we know they can do anything, as Shenji said, they can play, they can play anything. So, but the real learning experience is when I have to figure out what's not working and convey it to a high school or a college or ensemble. So what I should say is that if you're going to work with high school or college ensemble, be ready for it to be an educational experience, one in which you're going to learn a great deal and much more than if you work with the New York Philharmonic. As I have to be absolutely honest. So while it's very prestigious to work with the New York Philharmonic, I think it's a much more an experience of much more growth when you work with, say, the Okemos High School here in Michigan, for sure.
I'll tell you this, this seems like eons ago, but Steve did a one of these with Jennifer Higdon, and someone posed the question of your most memorable experience. She named working with the middle school group that she came here and worked with. I mean, and you're like, oh, okay. And I get it.
Yeah.
I get it, because they have an energy of show me, teach me, guide me, and it's not like you got 3 minutes, you better not talk, good luck, and see you tomorrow, and we've all been there. Just moving on to say that again.
No, and you learn the most when you have to teach it.
Well, and
about your own music. I mean, I don't have to teach anything to these fantastic players of the Cleveland Orchestra, but I do have to work very hard to convey
something. Kids are real honest. Like, what did you mean by that? I mean, they'll be like.
Yeah, I echoes you too, because you don't know how grateful we are to you guys. Each year we have the band reading and band competition. We also have the orchestra reading and orchestra competition, both, right? And each year you put up the winning works on stage, but also you read all of them. During these reading sections, we have learned a lot. So you guys help us to grow, actually, for our whole department. And also me too, because before I wrote for middle school bands, I need to go to middle school. I really went to the younger middle school kids, like 13 years old to 15, right? And then I went to the older ones. They are in different levels, right? And I got to be a part of the collection of the American Composers Forum, which is called Band Quest. Yep. And they collected so many of them. All pieces are in different styles from different backgrounds. And so they give an educational program to talk about the background of each piece and talk about the technique of every piece you have to learn. So sometimes it may cost like a whole semester to learn one piece, because you had to learn from different angles of that piece. And they invited the composers to talk and to answer all questions to the middle school kids. And I thought that those are the most exciting sections too. And Lorenzo mentions that we have gone through all this. If you check on YouTube, you see them.
And I'm thinking to, I'm going to move to a question one of our students, many actually asked about this. If you're commissioned by a unique group, okay, so not middle school, not high school, but by a unique group with varied instruments. So, I mean, I know we're all fans of Yo-Yo Ma and Silk Road Ensemble, and he's put together this cultural ensemble that brings together instruments from all different backgrounds. But maybe you can speak to if you've had the opportunity, or how you would trying to have the opportunity to write for a combination of instruments that maybe aren't necessarily people would think those traditionally go together. Or maybe you could even speak to that in your own personal experience. Ricardo, would you mind starting with that one?
I would love to. That's been been my quest since I started. One thing, it's an important question to ask now, because I've seen how sensitive people are now to the so-called appropriation and wrongs appropriation, something that I have issues with. But it's out there, and we need to address it. So the first thing I would recommend is that, don't work with traditions that you have not taken the time to study as best as you can. I mean, it's not like you need to go and move to Nigeria for 2 years in order to be able to write for a Yoruba group. No, but you do need to be aware of all the sensitivities and all performance practices before you even get to do this. So it means, it takes a while before you can be comfortable. It takes an entire life. But when you are, then you have to consider several things. So what are you dealing with? First, performance practices. Probably some are going to be notated and some are not going to be notated. So how do you work with that? Because there are musicians who are going to be able just to read anything that you put them in front of them, but they won't be able to, let's just say in a very banal way to swing, for example. They won't be able to understand beyond what's in the score. Yet there's another group of people who can do it very well, but how do you convey sophisticated ideas and combinations? So you need to sort of right away strategize and find a way of dealing with those that very important dichotomy between notated versus non-notated. Then the other aspect is the richness of timbre. If you're working with an electric guitar, for example, amplified, and then you have a string quartet that is not amplified versus not amplified, danger. You need to really take time to understand timbrical issues and acoustic versus non-acoustic. Right. The other thing is just basic. I think Roshan was alluding to this, but more in the setting of ensembles. But also, each different type of music has a different culture, a different way of understanding how you make music. Some people like to get to rehearsals really late because that's part of their tradition. They like to come with a bottle of rum, and they have to perform and they have to rehearse late and with a bottle of rum. So would you say, no, you can't do that because we are rehearsing here in this sacred space of music? No. So, know what the cultures are and do your homework before you even think of combining these.
I think that's excellent advice. I mean, just to spend time doing research. You mean you don't just go pen to paper? Yeah. Chinyi?
Because I have written a lot of works for Chinese traditional instruments. So that is a topic you ask me. So I also wrote some pieces with double instruments, like a Western mix with Chinese traditional instruments, that kind of things. I think that Lorenzo is very correct. To get to deeply to the culture and the technique and the style, then you got to learn how the dialogue could go on, how they could be combined. So that is the technical part, as well as the language part. For example, some pitches may not be played together in unison because their temperament is different, right? Between traditional instruments and Western standard instruments. Classical instruments. So those are the things we got to learn. That's why we have that course I teach, like orchestration in a special topic at UMKC. And even before I came to UMKC, it was at Peabody. I opened this course when I first taught 20 some years ago. And I thought that our students should learn not only the traditional culture with the repertoire, but then we taught them how to combine with modern ensembles in various instrumentation, and how to make balance, how to interact, and how to get the language being melted or work together. And so those are scientific, I think, practical, technical. And so it's not just dreaming. If you dream, you can do it. You can sing it out. You cannot. Actually, you have to learn the technique. You really need to go deeply to the depth of the culture and the language and the technique for each instrument if you want to write for. When I wrote the pipa solo, I didn't know how to play the pipa, right? That is a 4-string pair lute shape. I even had to draw a picture and then I could know the fingering, right? And that piece became like a competition set piece, right? For many competitions, I wrote that trio for Yo-Yo Ma and violin and pipa. And after that, that's why the Pacific Symphony came to me. Like what Rosanna said, what do you want to write? Whatever you want. I said, Yo-Yo Ma, concerto. So they invited Yo-Yo Ma to premiere the concerto. And that was the only case, but Rosanna.
It's good to know it happens, though. It's like,
yeah, usually I don't have
right.
this privilege.
Right.
So Roshan, have you had experience with that as well? Thank you, Dr. Chen.
I want to fully underscore everything that my colleagues have said. When I think about my own experience, it's kind of manifested through some of the issues that we've already touched on, issues of like timbral considerations, specifically grappling with like some amplified instruments and some non-amplified instruments. But I think when I think about a young composer starting out with concerns about writing for like a group that seems weird or non-standard, I would say that now is the time to write a weird instrumentation. Like if now, with of course underscoring everything else, like please be culturally sensitive and like don't be cool, dude. Please be culturally sensitive. But within that, like if you want to write a piece for electric guitar and 6 piccolos and antiphonal break drum and microtonal glockenspiel, when else are you going to do that if not while you're in school? Do it now, because opportunities like that don't come every day. And there's a lot to be learned from writing. I loved writing those weird pieces. And even now, I mean, now as kind of more standardized ensembles come my way, which I'm grateful for and I love, if somebody said to me, we would like a piece for, 40 flutes, I'd be so excited. And that doesn't even actually sound that weird. So maybe just like as a side note to the excellent points that my colleagues made, I would advise a young composer to embrace the unusual ensembles because now is the time.
When I was when I was leaving the University of Michigan to come to UMKC, I asked Robert Reynolds about what did you make any mistakes? And he said, "Yeah, I did. This is the one." I mean, he admitted he made many, but he said the one primary one that I made was when I was here on the faculty of Michigan for all those years, I didn't ask the composers to write something for me, and I ended up having to get them to write later and pay them thousands and thousands.
Get them young. They're still cheap.
Steve, I'm Steve. He goes, Steve, when you go down there, make sure you build friends with the composition community immediately. And towards that end, for our students that are watching this, we're fortunate. All 3 of these schools have substantial composers working in their environments. And I have dreamed, I've said this in public, I've said it in faculty meetings, and I dream of the day when all of our undergrads have to commission one of our composition students for pieces performed on their senior recitals in whatever instrumentations, because
Amazing. Yeah.
we have up to 80 composers and we have all these people doing senior recitals. I said, what a great way for our students, one, to get to know each other, two, to collaborate, three, to build networking and lifelong relationships together. And the composers are learning their craft while the students are learning their instrument. It's an A+ endeavor. But our students, if you're listening to me and you're in classes, you have composers sitting next to you in chairs. Make friends with them. Stop your thumbs on your phones and talk next to you and say, let's do something.
We're shy people. We are shy weirdos.
Yes, right.
Be nice to us, but we respond well to positive reinforcement.
Yeah, this year, our chamber competition is given to cello solo and saxophone solo. Because under the pandemic, we cannot go for a large group. So that's why our chamber competition changed to solo, because everybody could put online. And we have invited these two. They are very energetic.
It's wonderful.
Faculty members.
I'm going to switch channels to another question that we're going to skip a couple if you're looking down your list, because I think we're kind of meandering around some of them. But I want to know, and our students want to know, I think this is a good question. Do you find it easier to compose with a completely blank canvas, no parameters or limitations, whether it be instrumentation, setting, programmatic themes, or do you prefer having some limitations to work with? Or Ricardo?
I have to quote here our good friend Igor Stravinsky. I'm sorry. I'm old-fashioned, you know.
You know, I agree. You must, please.
But I don't know with the same quote that Roshan is thinking, but probably it is. But, you know, somewhere I read that he said that the more limitations, the freer the composer is. And I've experienced that myself. So, yes, I welcome limitations, but I also do quite well with a complete blank canvas where in fact, it's more difficult that way. I always, that to me feels like I tell the students when they're frightened about starting with a complete blank canvas, I say, you know, imagine that you're about to jump in Lake Michigan, you know, in the middle of March or May, and you know how cold that water is going to be. But you know that if you have the guts to jump in the water, once you're in the water, first you're going to lose your breath. You're going to think your heart is going to, you know, jump out, but it won't. And then you'll survive, and then you'll feel great in that, you know, 50-degree water. And I would say, you know, when it's blank canvas like that, it's frightening, but you can do it. And once you're in it, you'll feel great.
Beautiful. Roshan?
I am fully in agreement with limitations. Although to a certain extent, I kind of like to make my own limitations. I like a limitation from when I am writing for somebody. I like a loose limitation, like a time limitation. Just instrumentation in itself is a limitation. Like writing for solo piano, there's only like that is itself a limitation. And then after that, I like to come up with my own limitations. But I agree, there's just something terrifying about like, I think it's called option paralysis. Like when you walk into, this happens to me all the time. I walk into a bookstore and I think, okay, there was that book I wanted to read. Wait, all of a sudden, I've never heard of any books that have ever been written. I can't think of a single book ever, just because I'm surrounded by books and there's too many options. So I like to have narrower options, but I also like to narrow my own options.
Chenyi?
Wow, this is a good question, right? Usually, people came to me actually, they came with instrumentation. Also, they came with the length as well, with the deadlines as well. So I have to consider all of this when I decided to say yes or to just start to work with the piece. So that is something. Yet, none of them have ever given me a limitation of what I write. I don't think anybody had told me what I needed to write, and fast or slow, or what kind of background, or what kind of sound, or style. Nobody had ever told me. And only one time, one choral commission came to me. It's a university choral commission. They asked for, because the donor asked for something religion. And then I said, oh, could I do that with an ancient Chinese thought? This is a kind of a thought. If you don't call that religion, but it belongs to philosophy, or for this kind of a direction. And they came back to me immediately. They said, great. That is a great idea. That was for Ithaca College choir. So they had commissioned me twice, or 3 times. So that was one of those cases. But usually I don't have this limitation. So I came up with my own ideas because I read every day, like to catch imitations, imagination, or a technique, any kind of inspiration, that kind of ideas collecting that is needed. And then that should also fit the instrumentation first. So that's what I do. For my students, when they don't have any limitation, because we would say, this semester you have to write such and such form and such and such an instrumentation, they would get scared. Oh, 2 instruments, what to do? And then you have to guide them. You have to inspire them. What is in your background, in your mind, in your culture, what you listen to every day, what you love. Then from those, you could get the inspiration for them to write for chamber groups, for the instrumentation. Even you can inspire them what to be paired up together very well. It sounded very well as the sound that you like, that you imagine. So that part maybe we could help.
This is a good point here, because we have a lot of students that I know are in our university ensembles, in the conservatory ensemble, and all of our university ensembles, that love to play their instruments, but they're also composing. So not just for them, but for anybody looking at this process, I'm sure we've all dealt with this, but how do you get past your own kind of self-doubt and really appreciate what you're doing? And I mean, imposter syndrome, they've been calling it. That's been the buzz phrase in academia. So how do you help someone get through that self-doubt and appreciate what they're doing? And even for you, Roshan, I'm going to let you start on that one.
Okay. Well, I'm a bad person to ask, because
okay, never mind.
Of crippling self-doubt. But okay, so here's my answer to that question.
That's good, because
yeah, right.
People look at us and go, well, they have the job I want.
Right. So as someone who is constantly who constantly lives with that, I would say the thing that I personally find the most helpful, and that I think a certain type of personality maybe it resonates with, is to understand that everybody feels that way. Everybody feels that way, especially early on. Everybody is like a quivering, naked bunch of raw nerves that don't know what they're doing. And everybody feels that exact same way. And there's that moment where you're like, oh, I think I can do this. And we're all kind of living for that moment. And I think helping students realize that, and when I'm having crippling self-doubt, and I'm now been doing this long enough that I know that sooner or later, hopefully, there's going to be that moment again where I kind of feel like, hey, I kind of know how to do this. I know that it's coming, and so I can wait for it. But to reassure people that it will happen and that everybody feels that way, I think that is a useful thing for people to be aware of.
That's good advice. Chinyi?
I thought that, and now, do you know that our freshman class, need to perform each other's works. Professor this morning and Professor David Flertmeyer, and they have asked their students to be in groups, and they will write for each other. For example, the composition major should write for the people who are in his or her group, and then they would perform. And
That's
even
great,
in their theory courses, at the end, they would also have to perform one chamber work played by the classmates in their class. And I thought that is the best effort
Yeah.
To get a good result, because why I learn about this, because my students came to me and asked for help. So I got to help them for rehearsal. And also for me, how to help for the beginners when they feel shy and not to publish their works. That also was my experience too. When I first wrote, 17 years old, when I worked as a concertmaster in the orchestra, and I got to write for the orchestra, and I feel very ashamed when the trumpet play my pitches far away. I heard that I wanted to take a hold too high, like when I heard my own tunes. That was a long time ago. But now what I did is that I help my freshman people when she couldn't find a player. I play in her trio. The other two players are also undergrad students. And then I join in, and then she doesn't feel shame anymore because
How
she
nice
has
of
to
you.
go through this.
Lovely. Oh.
That's great. Ricardo,
Well, Joe, what is it that you call that syndrome of
they call it imposter syndrome. That's the big jargon in academia, or even actually the professional world. Feeling
Yes.
like you're an imposter.
Well, I call it, and I've thought of this carefully, and I talk to my students a lot about this because I see how it paralyzes them.
Mm-hmm.
I call it the Frankenstein syndrome. And the reason why I do this is because after I read for the first time Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, I realized that that book has been so misunderstood. That this was not about a monster. This was about a doctor who rejected his creation. Simple as that. So, and I see that in every creator, man or woman or whatever. Always, you will reject. It's a defense mechanism. If you have read Freud, you will understand that. You just defenses say what you did is horrible, and only until it still stands after performance after performance, and you realize, wow, actually, this is not so bad, you will maybe convince yourself. So I have my students read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I recommend it, and to read it thinking about creativity and rejection of your own creativity. And it always works. And I think Mary Shelley was just a genius when she wrote this back in the, I don't know, 1830s, and was able to actually see creativity through the eyes of a man who cannot produce life on their own. So we have to, come out with these ways of creating life, but artificially. And she understood all that, and she wrote it down beautifully. And yes, the point is that, when we have to create something that's not doesn't come from our own bodies, then we're going to reject it. We don't do it with our children, but we will do it with a composition.
That is what a great opportunity for everyone to go read.
Yes,
I love that.
I
Yeah.
highly recommend, and discuss it. Discuss it with
Yeah.
your teacher Chen Yi.
You
What
know,
you think this book is about, and if you read it carefully and you not forget about the movies and all those, you actually read what's there, you'll find this extraordinary lesson on creativity and how you approach your own creativity.
Ricardo, thank you for that. Steve and I reflect routinely on the accidental driving in our vehicle, and a recording comes on, and we're like, who is that? And then we realize it's the group we conducted, that at the time we conducted, like, oh, that wasn't the best thing. And then you come back to it and go, you know what? That was okay.
Well, you're suffering the Frankenstein syndrome right there.
Yeah. Thank you. Good advice.
So anybody else want to pick up on? I got the next question, but I want to set into this. I stay with me. So in 2008, Jim Moberly was on our faculty, and I asked him to write a piece for us because we were going to perform at a conference, and I wanted to showcase our composers. And I said, write whatever you want, Jim. And Jim's father passed away. Jim's father was a real wordsmith and wrote love letters to his wife for many, many years. And he decided that he was going to take on the task to write a piece to from the husband to the wife, with the soprano singing in the way that she is reading the love letters. And it was called Words of Love. And I then the mom comes to the dress rehearsal, and sorry,
Jim's mom.
Jim's mom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
sorry,
What?
I'll lose it when I tell this story. Anyway, she is there. We're performing this piece for the kids. I mean, performing the piece with the Wind Symphony, and the mom is in the audience crying. Jim is crying his eyes out. It's in the dress rehearsal, and I'm sobbing. We're all just a big old mess. And that same piece in a different setting, there was a rehearsal, and there was a person in a wheelchair um, listening to the rehearsal. And Jim goes up to the person after the dress rehearsal, and was not affiliated with the ensemble, just there listening. And Jim said, I'm so thankful that you're here, and I'm curious why you're here, and it's amazing to me. And the person said, when I listen to you, it's the only when I'm listening to this music, it's one of the only times I don't feel pain. And at that moment, that transcendent ideal of music making and composition, it changes you. And as an active participant in that, that's a piece that is, and I've been so blessed to be involved with so many commissions, but just the poignancy of how the timing and the stars aligned, and like that is a piece that will resonate with me until I'm off the earth. And the question that the students are asking, just the reason I brought that up, is what have you written that has changed you in maybe some unforeseen way? And we can start this with Chen Yi.
And I thought that that trio that I have mentioned, for pipa, violin, and cello, because there was a request from Chamber Music Society of Minnesota. After they had an event before the Minnesota Symphony performed a Japanese composer's piece. There was a parade, like with thousands of candles, to remember the World War II of the Japanese invasion to many countries in Asia countries, and so that came up with the project called the Soul, the Bridge of the Souls. Wanted to call the souls back, and by then they had never met me, but they faxed me to our dean's office to ask me to accept this commission if I want to do it. It's a chamber concert dedicated to the commemoration and remember of the World War II. And because of that event, that caused for this huge controversial kind of opinions and protest. And the Minnesota Symphony has added an insert, like the one page of printed material to tell the World War II story in the program book before they premiere the Japanese composer's work. And so right after that, they shaped up this concert in Orlovey Hall in Minnesota, and invited Yo-Yo-Ma to play in all these pieces in the premiere. One is by Japanese composer. One is by Korean composer, who is a professor in Santa Cruz. And one is American composer, Professor Andrew Embry, who was teaching in UC Berkeley, because he was a member of the World War II, being sent to Korea by then, and one is Chinese, and so when I received these facts, immediately I said yes, because I didn't think of money. I only remember that my parents, my mom would just woke up middle of the night yelling, nightmare. Woke up and said the Japanese bomb is coming, the flight is coming, and got to run because they were in medical schools, and some of their classmates died because of the bomb, and they learned how to run. If you run straight, you die, definitely. If you run to the sides, then you hide, right? That kind of nightmare. She would just wake up and yell, and I still remember this clearly, and by all these stories. After I received this commission, certainly all foundations came in to support the project, and then I read a book by Irish Chang, that is Nanking, ripped off Nanking, because Nanking was the old capital of China, and I cried so hard. And everywhere I went, I took the plane and took the train, and because I went outside to give lectures, on the way, I sometimes long distance flights, I just read the book and cried so hard. And for a whole month, nothing else I could do. Emotionally, I wrote that piece. And I thought that is the hardest piece I wrote, but one of the fastest piece I completed. And that is something very impressed for myself, because many other pieces I wrote fast, because technically you go through, right? Or you got an imagination right away, you grabbed it and you start to work on the project. So this time is different because it's so hard for me emotionally. So that changes me. And also in this piece, some very simple melodies, even unisons.
Roshan?
Right.
Roshan?
Yeah, I think I'd like to think that, after, and probably all of us would like to think that we're a little bit changed after every piece, but that's probably a lame answer, so I'm not going to get there. But I would say I don't know that I have a profound story, but I can tell you that there have been a lot of pieces where I have been afraid to write something, where I've been apprehensive to do something a certain way, even though it seems like the only way to me, and so I do it that way, and then I kind of cringe, and my imposter syndrome comes out, but almost always that's the moment, that thing that I was the most afraid to do, that made me worry that everyone was going to find me out. That's usually the moment that resonates the most with me. There was a piece that I wrote, and this isn't like a profound, it's not like a profoundly emotional piece, but I wrote a piece called Points of Departure, which is for a band and vocalist or vocalists. And actually, part of what was really meaningful to me about that piece was I had a student in my studio at the time, and she was the kind of student who she's okay. This is not a sad story about her. She's fine. She has her finger in every pot. She's got a concert series, and she's a performer, and she's a writer, and she does a little bit of everything. And she would come in and she would talk to me about all these things that she was doing, and I'd just be like, wow, I used to be able to do this stuff. When did I decide that I couldn't for example, write my own text for something. So I decided I was going to write my own text because this was the piece that was on the desk, and I decided to write my own text for this piece, and it was really meaningful to me to take ownership of that aspect of the piece, which I never would have considered otherwise, and kind of transformed the way I think about, like, I don't have to just, it's okay to do more than one thing. You don't have to just do one thing. And so that's kind of maybe a different perspective on that question, but nonetheless, and it was maybe 10 or 12 years ago when I was writing that piece, but it did kind of change the way I think about how to do things.
Thank you. Ricardo, last year we were doing the wall. I spent a lot of time studying that note, and then the note gets inside of you, right? And I'm not intimate with Ricardo. I've only performed the piece, but it was clear to me that the depth of thought and subject matter of your pieces is of high importance, shall we say. So I whatever that's worth, it was really meaningful. Those notes that you all write at the beginning of those scores really can, for people that are spending time and going on the treasure hunt to try to uncover all of this, it's really meaningful. So I just wanted to let you know, Ricardo, that was meaningful to me, just the thought inside of your brain about that. But what might you have to share?
Well, first, two things. First, thank you, Steve, for that incredible story you just told of Jim Moberly, who's somebody I haven't seen for a long time, but I always admire his music. And in fact, I wrote the name of the title, "Words of Love," because I'm curating a concert in a couple of year, and I'm looking for this type of topic. So thank you. And Chen Yi, I had the pleasure of studying with Andrew Embry at the University of Chicago, an extraordinary man. I studied with him for almost a year, and I loved him. So
yeah. I also studied with him in Composers Conference in 1987.
Yes. Well, that was about the time I studied with him as well in Chicago. So thank you for reminding me of him. Steve, El Muro is one piece that did have a transforming effect on me. But as Roshan said, I think it's genuine what she said, that every piece has a transformative effect. I tell my students, if you don't feel surprised about your own creativity and transform at the end of a piece, no matter if it's a 1-minute piece or 20-minute piece, then maybe the creative process didn't do what it's supposed to do, which is to heal somehow and to make you look at your own self differently. So I always encourage them to think about that afterwards. So I do have pieces that are extremely meaningful simply because they caught me in moments that I was not expecting for me to be caught. I can just share with you one of them. And this was back in, 1998. I was commissioned by a wonderful cellist from Mexico, Carlos Prieto, who was single-handedly commissioned every single composer of the Americas and recorded. Yeah.
He has a book.
Yes. And by the way, he tells a story that I'm about to tell you in that book. So he commissioned this work for cello and piano, and I was, eager to write it, and I started writing it. And I thought for the first time in my life, write a piece of music that would be a portrait of my mother. I didn't see her often because she lived in Venezuela. I lived in the U.S. And so I based it on a beautiful photo of her dressed in this Chicago Institute of Art gown. There was a Monet thing, and she was, it's all blue and green, the colors. So I called it Sicilian Blue and Green, this photograph. So I called my mom and said, "Mom, you know what I'm doing? I'm writing a piece for cello and piano. And guess what? What? Well, I'm composing a portrait of you." And she was, of course, very, very embarrassed by the whole thing. But there I go.
I think my mother would kill me if I did that.
Yeah, well, she didn't. But this is a story. About a month later, she died unexpectedly in the middle of me writing this portrait of my mother. So, of course, I had to take a break. But I had this commission, and I wanted to do it. And by the way, the day my mother died, I went to see Yo-Yo Ma play a concert in Chicago. I mean, I had tickets, and I thought, okay, I could just forget about my life completely, or I can do something. I couldn't rush to Venezuela that evening, so I went to see a concert of Yo-Yo Ma. It was spectacular. Anyway, but what happened was that this piece was supposed to be a portrait of my mother, ended up being a requiem to my mom, and I'm glad. In fact, I'm glad it turned that way. And it's you can see starting the second movement, it just veers to a different world altogether. I don't know whether it's my pain or the struggles my mother went through with her emotional life, but it's maybe both together. And boy, there is, I never ever cry I'm very sentimental. I cry for movies, I cry for music. I never cried for my own music. But this is one piece that there's one moment in that piece of music towards the end that I always get a teary-eyed. It's just, it just draws me right back to that moment and to the circumstances around it. The most miraculous thing was that just by an incredible coincidence, that piece was premiered on Mother's Day in Venezuela by Carlos Prieto. So, round story. Yes, that is transformative. But I have many other stories, and I think every single piece, as Roshan said, is transformative. But this is particularly so.
Our this has gone by quickly. I can't believe it. Steve and I have several friends, and I'm very thankful I can count you among them, that compose and give us the gift of composition. And I know that these last several months have been challenging for all artists and energy and finding creativity. And one of my dear friends had just lost someone where he wrote a piece that was an homage to him. And the composer said to me, I just wish I'd never had to write that piece. And I said, look, we're looking at the immediate right now. We're not looking at when, and this is the part that I wanted them to understand. When I'm gone, conductor boy, that piece is going to live way beyond the moment I had the opportunity to conduct that piece in that moment with what we were thinking about this person. But that homage, like yours for your mothers or others, will live to other people and stir emotions based on where they, gyms may have gyms, but I'm envious of the energy that you all have as a gift to write. And I'm going to ask you this question because maybe I wasn't given the opportunity, or maybe I was afraid of it. But one of the questions came up numerous times from our students. How do I start this process? How do I start composing? How do I do this? And I don't feel like I have no experience. And how do I do it? Ricardo, I'll start with you.
I did look at that question, and that's a hard question to answer. A very good one. I'm glad one of your students asked it. So what I thought is, it is daunting. What do you start? I always compare composing with Lego. Really, at the most simple level, you can just grab one little block of Lego and put it here, and then grab another block of Lego and put it next to it, and then put another one, and then you can put another one, and you suddenly you look at it, hey, you have shape, just by grabbing little pieces and putting them together. That's very simple, but even that is scary. But I guess an advice I have is, listen to music very reflectively, and ask yourself as you're listening to music, what is it that you like and do not like about this music? Because in so doing, you are engaged in the creative process. You're starting that self-discovery. You're starting to talk with yourself. And that composition is what it is. You start dialoguing with yourself. So I guess if you really just don't know where to go, grab music, start listening to it carefully, and ask yourself those questions, try to answer them, and then see whether you can actually, based on what you learn from that experience of this music that you like or don't like, then sit down, and maybe with your instrument, no matter what level you play that instrument, whether you are, you're a wonderful pianist or not, just grab that instrument, make this experience physical, just somehow. So take it out of your head and put it into something that's going to sound tangible, and let it go, let it flow. So maybe, that would help.
That makes sense for me. I'm as a trumpeter who's listened to jazz throughout my entire life. I try to emulate and try to do it there. So that's good advice. Chinyi?
And because during the pandemic, many orchestras have to change instrumentation when they have the series. This time, St. Paul Chamber Orchestra came to me and asked for a commission piece. And they asked me whether I could write a solo piece for one of their principal players to play. And I said, yes, oboe would be my choice. and their oboist, mom is a Chinese, and her dad is not. But it happened to be her mom also came from my hometown in China. And I also learned that her mom died several years ago. And so I came up with this piece. I said that I could take some material to echo the folk song of the region that your cultural heritage would have been shared with you. And then I wrote her a solo oboe piece, taking the very sad folk tune material, something like a this flat tone is like a jazz flat, right? And then I wrote the oboe solo, like this, like this, to remind her the cultural heritage. And also I dedicated the piece to the people who died, for the memory of the people who died during the pandemic. And so that's something I wrote for St. Paul Chamber Orchestra recently. The premiere is next month. Yeah, so it's the same if we come up with this kind of emotion. That is the first. And then you have found the relation between the subject, between who you write for, and also between the ability, what they could do, instrumentation, or this as a combination. And then I came up with this picture material. That is not a long piece, but the middle is somehow virtuoso because it grows to the climax, right? And it comes down with that kind of not square rhythm, because it's a kind of a folk style. When you sing it, it's a kind of a random rhythm, right? Yet it's precisely written down, notated.
So let me, Roshan, I'm going to have you answer that question in a minute. Just quick answer. How old were you when you started composing, Ricardo?
When I started fooling on the piano, 13, 14.
Chenyi, you said 17, but it was earlier.
17, yeah, 17, not earlier. But
17.
But when I was 15 as a farmer in countryside, I played improvisation violin.
So you'd make stuff up. Roshan?
Yeah. I was 17, but I was realizing that I was better at making stuff up than practicing before then.
So any words of wisdom or advice for people going, how do I start this journey?
So I teach 2 classes at the University of Michigan. They're both composition classes. They are both for non-majors. One is for non-music majors who want to learn how to compose. The other one is for music majors who just aren't composition majors. And so I think about this question a lot. And in my experience, I think, honestly, so here's some specific things that I would tell those students, that I do tell those students. First of all, I think the only way to really learn how to do it is I think you just have to do it. And I think we've built up enough, I think it's particularly those of us in the conservatory or in academia, we have hangups. Like a composer is a specific thing. And it's a specific person, who has specific qualifications. But you know what? So usually I do a big thing at the beginning of the semester saying, I'm a trained professional and I You are composers. Welcome to the club. And so if there's anybody watching this that needs permission to be a composer, I give you permission. You
It's
are
like
a composer.
therapy. Awesome.
Right? So just do it, because and thank goodness this isn't how we train. Maybe it is how we train brain surgeons. I don't actually know. But like you don't have to get anyone's permission, and you don't have to be certified. You just need to put sounds together in a way that is compelling to you. I usually, with my composition classes, I have them start in my class with performers, I have them start with their own instruments. Find 3 sounds that your instrument makes, that you like to make on your instrument, and using only those sounds and no other sounds, write a 60-second piece. Perform it. Done. Composer. And that's a good way, I think. So that has limitations, that has personal expression. Hopefully it's kind of fun. Like then expand that piece to 2 minutes, or add another piece. Add another layer of, like, add another instrument, add another voice. It is also important to note that writing a piece of music does not necessarily, like, you don't need a pencil. We're not necessarily talking about notation. In my comp class for non-music majors, there's a lot of people who have amazing musical ideas, but like the mechanics of musical notation gets in the way. And it's not a notation class, it's a composition class. So if notation is not your bag, there are so many digital audio workstations, or like GarageBand. So go to the BBC database of sounds, download. They have tens of thousands of sounds that you can download. Take 3 of them. I like 3. Take a limited number of those sounds, download them, take GarageBand or Audacity or something free, and put those sounds together in a way that is interesting to you. No notation, or use Logic to use anything you can. It doesn't have to be traditional notation. Finally, I would say listen omnivorously, listen analytically, listen reflectively, like Ricardo said, because that's only gonna feed the machine. The more that goes in, the better stuff that comes out. But above all else, you just have to do it, and don't wait for anybody to give you permission to do it. Because if you wait for anybody, no one's going to give you permission to do it, except for me.
I
Do it.
I appreciate that. I think sometimes we can stifle creativity because we start with parameters, and not to go down the path. But I mean, it's like the child with a box of crayons, and they start painting, and you start telling them, no, you got to stay here and do that, and eventually it's over. But wow.
I was just about to say a story. I've always, I know ensembles. My whole life's with ensembles, and I know string quartets, and I know trios, and I know it all. I listen to it. I spend 24/7 of my life, and I said, I want to write something. So I can do this, and I come up with a melody that haunts me, and I wake up in the middle of the night, and then I'm like, what's the harmony underneath it? And I'm like, I have no idea. And because I'm sorry for the aside here. But I am so glad we're revisiting theory curricula nationwide based on all the things that our society is dealing with right now, because I honestly think that because I was only exposed to Bach, and that's where these chord progressions and everything about it, figured bass and all this, I had this forced box around my idea that I have to put. It wasn't until I was 40, whenever Cariliano was here, Chinyi, and he was talking about his compositional process with one of our string quartets, and he said, I'd write a graph, and it's like high point, low point, goes to this, a little softer here, and there's no notation. It's just a storyboard of a journey. And I was like, what? And it might just be wolf calls, or it might be all the things that Roshan is talking about. And now all of a sudden there's a major chord, and then it fits the story that he was trying to create. And it was so freeing when I heard that. And at some point, I'm going to challenge myself and try to do something, So
many of our students are in your bands. And when I started composing, I was not a composer, right? I was a player in the orchestra. So your students will definitely, if you don't mind, they will switch to composition major, don't they?
You heard it here.
Because because no. When you tell them how easy possibilities are there, and how you show them the idea, how we make it, and they would follow, right? And so that is the case. After our talk, many of them would switch to composition.
I hope so.
All right. You heard it here first, folks.
All right, we're bringing this to a close.
Before everybody goes to composition, it'll be over.
Everybody should.
No kidding.
Conducting anything.
No. I used to teach freshman and sophomore theory class. I was brought in 4 times each semester to teach everybody to compose. You know that now next semester, Professor Tom Haber will start teaching non-composition major composition.
Beautiful. That's wonderful.
It would be a big class.
So each of you get a chance right now to think about something you want to convey to our players and to the people watching that we haven't talked about with regard to this whole thing called composition. So I don't know if you have anything that comes to mind. Does anybody want to go first? Something that someone wants to share? We'll end with this.
I just, yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead, Ricardo.
No, very simple. I would say empathy, compassion. Those are 2 words that I will always keep there. And composition is a way of sharing that, compassion and empathy.
Yeah, being creative when you perform.
Awesome.
I think I touched on mine. I kind of keep coming back to mine. Like, you don't need someone else's permission to do anything. You don't need someone else's permission to write music. Like, if you want to write music, then write music.
I'm going to jump in before Steve kind of wraps up for us. I still want to go back to the sentiment I shared about the gifts you are able to give our communities, especially during challenging times. You know, I can't imagine at times sitting there with a blank slate, just having to get something out when there's so much going on that my mind would want to do so many things. So I appreciate the idea of parameters, but I want to tell you from a conductor, educator perspective, I'm thankful that you would share, number one, your creative art of composition with our world of conducting and artistry on that level. And then your wisdom with our students who have had to kind of, like all of us, make some changes that I think we're all going to look back and go, wow, we really grew after we had an opportunity to really see what matters to us. So I know that long after I've gone and finished conducting whatever piece, fill in the blank, the gifts you've given us will last forever. And I just want you to know that we appreciate it. And from my personal perspective, I couldn't think of 3 better people to have on a panel like this. So just wanted to say thank you.
Well, thank you for your support, and thanks for having us here. This has been so much fun.
I want to talk directly to our students for a second. There are people on this panel that Rome Prize, Guggenheim's, American Academy of Arts and Letters, residencies all over the place. Ricardo's won a recent Grammy. Congratulations, by the way.
Well, but nominated.
Oh, nomination for a Grammy. Sorry.
But the prize is still.
Oh, they called us. We have inside scoops here.
No, it's the, as Joe mentioned, the collected wisdom, not just in ability, but in heart. Is someone once said to me, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And students remember what they feel, not what they think. And it is so clearly evident to me that the compassion, the empathy, the care, the concern is going to transcend all of us, including yourselves, I think. And that is, you know, I pray people are wanting the world to be more beautiful and better. And there's no way spending time getting to know these 3 people, students, you're going to be better by the end of it. So UMKC students, you get to run into Chinny in the hallway when we get back to normal. and just give her a high five and say, you know, I'm so thankful for that, and just find a reason to be in lectures. And then everybody, when I look forward to our paths crossing again. If you're watching this and you're not in the school and you're just on our YouTube channel, give us a like, please. Join our environment. We're really proud of these conversations that we're having and sharing with people, and we do think it's helping us evolve into the world we want to see, right? So thank you for spending your time. I hope you'll have a good night if it's in the evening, or if it's in the day. I hope you have a great remainder of your day. It's been a privilege. It's been an honor. And I hope that we get to do this again sometime. So thank you, everybody.